If it's Wednesday, politics, protest, and wartime unrest. Pro-Palestinian demonstrations grow at college campuses across America as House Speaker Mike Johnson meets with Jewish students at Columbia University as we speak. And Israel says it's moving forward with a ground operation inside southern Gaza. Plus, the Supreme Court hears arguments in a key case that could determine the future of emergency room care for pregnant women in Idaho and beyond, as federal standards of care collide with state bans on the procedure. And President Biden signs into law a major foreign aid package, sending billions in emergency military assistance to Ukraine after months of congressional infighting and setbacks on the battlefield that pushed Kyiv to its breaking point. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez, and we begin today with the ongoing and growing protests at dozens of college campuses as students across the country demand that their universities divest from companies with ties to Israel, and as lawmakers here in Washington look to seize on the unrest. Those pro-Palestinian protests continue to spread, with new encampments popping up at a handful of other universities in Massachusetts and California, as well as rallies and walkouts at colleges in Texas and Illinois. Just moments ago, Emerson College in Boston warned students of potentially imminent action by law enforcement at its encampment. Overnight, more than 200 people were arrested at a protest in Brooklyn near Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's home. Meanwhile, at Columbia University, where the encampment protests largely began, early signs show administrators are making progress on tamping down some of the tensions on campus. Yesterday, the university set a midnight deadline for students to dismantle the encampments on campus, but later extended that deadline, citing constructive dialogue with organizers who are working on a plan to reduce the size of the encampment and limit discriminatory or harassing language. And this all comes as members of Congress, including Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson, have descended on Columbia, perhaps looking to highlight divisions within the Democratic Party over its support for Israel. Last hour, the speaker met with Jewish students on campus, and he's expected to hold a press conference. Actually, live pictures show that press conference has just started. And in a radio interview earlier today, the House Speaker called for the university's president to resign.
It's unconscionable. This President Shafiq is shown to be a very weak and inept leader. And I'll tell you that the real problem we have right now is that we're not getting strong leadership, obviously, from the White House or even some Democrats in Congress. I mean, the White House is caving to the anti-Semitic, I call it the pro-Hamas wing of the party now. They've backpedaled on their support for Israel.
Those comments, of course, coming on the same day as the president signed a massive foreign aid bill that includes more than $26 billion in aid to Israel. And joining me now outside Columbia's campus is NBC correspondent Tremaine Lee. Ali Vitale is on Capitol Hill. And I'm joined here on set by NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. Tremaine, I want to start with you. Columbia set a deadline to clear the encampment on campus. So what are you seeing and hearing from students today?
That's right, Gabe. Last night, as that midnight deadline approached, there was a chill sent through campus as many students feared that the administration might once again send the NYPD through campus. Remember, last week, more than 100 protesters were arrested, many of them saying that their rights were violated. But today, many of these student protesters, those who are operating in good faith and want to maintain their right to speak up, are breathing a sigh of relief as that deadline has extended for their encampment. As you've mentioned in that in your lead-in, they agreed to some conditions. One, removing many of the tents from that area, not using any harassing or discriminatory language, and also making sure that protesters who are not students at Columbia University are no longer part of that encampment. And so today it's another day of tension as those negotiations continue, but some progress has been made.
You know, and Tremaine, there are also claims that people who aren't students are involved in these protests. I know Mayor Eric Adams said that yesterday. So what are the universities doing to identify who are student protesters and who aren't?
Gabe, you've been around the block, so you know how these protests go. There are the core group of protesters, and then you have folks from outside the group, outside the organizations, outside the communities coming in. The same thing has happened here. So what the university has done is they basically locked down the campus. So each of these gates along Broadway here and around the campus have been closed down. There is more security. To actually get into campus now, you actually have to show your ID. And so things have been locked down, and they're trying to ensure and maintain that those who are, want to voice their concerns on the campus are actually from this campus.
And Tremaine, when these protests grow, sometimes the original message is lost. So these protesters originally, they had been calling on the university to divest from companies that provide weapons to Israel. Have administrators at Columbia signaled any potential change in policy? And if not, how does this all end?
Certainly, Gabe, things are still in flux here on campus. There are various negotiations, various demands, various calls for actions. Now, the university has yet to signal that they will have a shift in policy. But as you know, as things become more political, the House Speaker here today, the dividing line is only getting more entrenched. So in the coming days and weeks, perhaps we'll have a better understanding of how things might shake out here on campus. But again, as tense as it's been, Gabe.
Tremaine Lee, live for us at Columbia. Tremaine, thank you. And I want to turn now to Ali Vitale. And Ali, we're monitoring this news conference by House Speaker Johnson. We're told he was booed as he went up to the microphone. And these protests continue to draw visits by lawmakers. Why did Speaker Johnson feel like he needed to weigh in on these protests?
Well, look, the president of Columbia, Gabe, was just on Capitol Hill last week. It's why when you're looking at the picture next to us here on the screen, you see the chairwoman of the committee that she testified before, Virginia Foxx, standing right behind the speaker alongside other members of the New York delegation. In the blue behind Chairwoman Foxx, you can see Congresswoman Malliotakis. On the other side of the speaker, you can see Congressman D'Esposito, who represents parts of Long Island. So he's got the New York delegation there. You can also see Mike Lawler's head from around the district in my hometown in New York, the suburbs in Westchester County. A lot of members of the New York delegation there trying to mark this moment. But it comes after, of course, we saw Congress vote on aid to Israel. You've got an extremely vocal majority here in terms of the support that Israel needs at this moment. But then, of course, you translate that down to what's happening in these communities and on these campuses. And you see the speaker there now marking this moment. He was booed. You're right to point that out. But our understanding is that his response to those boos was basically telling the protesters and folks who were booing him, enjoy your free speech. What we expect him to say here, and I'm not sure if he's already hit upon it in his remarks or not, is that he wants the president of this university to resign. But also in an interview this morning on a conservative radio show, he echoed something that he heard from Senator Tom Cotton, which was, and I'll read it here, we need to also revoke federal funding to these universities if they cannot keep control. The speaker went on in that interview to say, we need to revoke these student visas for these violent protesters. So we hear him there not just coming with a warning for the president, but also the potential for some more action and pressure beyond that.
And so, Ali, besides calling for Columbia's president to resign, is there any new policy here that House Speaker Johnson is advocating for and other lawmakers? Is this just more of a partisan exercise?
Certainly it's about being on campus and making sure that the Republican line of thinking that we've heard here often on Capitol Hill, as we've seen and heard from a lot of these university presidents over the course of the last several months. It's not just that we've heard from President Shafiq, although that was here in the last 2 weeks. There were many other university presidents, some of whom were forced to resign from their posts after testifying in front of the committee about what you see going on these campuses, about claims of anti-Semitism. Certainly now we're seeing it reach a fever pitch, but that's what we're going to watch when they get back. Of course, Congress right now is on recess. It's why the speaker and so many of his colleagues are able to be on Columbia's campus, but they come back to town on Monday, and we'll see if this becomes a larger policy call, Gabe, than just telling this president to resign, but if there's actually a longer tail here in terms of legislation that they could even try to enact.
Ali Vitale, live for us on Capitol Hill. Ali, thank you. And I want to turn now to Chuck. Chuck, we're monitoring this news conference, and, House Speaker Johnson using that rhetoric that this madness has to stop. Are these college protests as salient as some of these lawmakers think?
I don't think they are, but if you're Speaker Johnson, after the week you've been through, you're looking for anything to change the subject, right? So he wants to look like a fighter. He wants to look like a partisan warrior again after going through what he did. So to me, it's smart politics on his part. frankly, is, hey, I'm going to go over here and be a part of this story so that people can't keep asking me, are you going to be Speaker of the House by the end of the week?
And Chuck, what do you make of how the Biden campaign is responding to this? You know, they're trying to downplay them.
They have no choice to downplay it.
Right.
Because,
but will it be like the Biden campaign says and the Biden allies say that come November, this isn't going to be a huge issue for young voters?
It all depends on whether there's still a hot war in Gaza. If there's not a hot war in Gaza, look, the semester ends in about 2 weeks everywhere. This continues to primarily be a coastal issue. And yes, maybe UT and Northwestern, it pops up, but in some ways, it actually sort of reinforces the idea those are kind of coastal-like cities. So, you know, this isn't showing up at the University of Missouri. This isn't showing up at the University of Colorado. So that's why I think the Biden campaign looks at it and says, okay, this is somewhat manufactured, right? D.C., New York, there's outside groups that are working. Look, I went to GW. GW early on, right after October 7th, had its share. And it was pretty clear that some of the student groups were getting advice and counsel and help from some national groups. It's in their interest to create the appearance that this is more divisive. Because politically, Gabe, and there's plenty of, you've probably talked to some of the Biden folks that have said the same thing. If Biden had the exact opposite position, his political problems would be 10x worse. Okay, not 2x worse, 10x worse. This isn't great. This is potentially a problem in 2 battleground states, Wisconsin and Michigan, because of Madison and the large urban migrant population. But if this is not a hot war in the fall, we have something called a summer break here, which is going to cool things down by itself. There's
also the difference. Not all young voters are student voters. So, you know, that's another point there. I want to turn to your column. It's out today every Wednesday. And in your column, you write about disinterest in this election. And, you know, that could lead to, you know, lower voter turnout. Do you think that is going to be a huge issue, you know, come November, or is it too early to tell?
Look, it's 3 straight months where interest in the election, we track this, 3 straight times where it's gone down. We're getting closer to the election and interest is going down. Now, let's think about it logically. Why is interest in this election down? Well, it's a rerun, right? Do sequels do as well as the first movie, right? Like, no, right? No. Do you get a higher rating on the second time you air a program or on the first time? So there's a little bit of, hey, people feel like they have perfect information. But the real question, this increases the variance. Like, we're all so convinced this is going to be a campaign that is either going to be 16 or 20, and it's either just going to be decided by 70,000 votes one way or the other, right? When you have a lower turnout, you actually increase variance, right? And what we've seen, the irony here is that lower turnout may help Biden. Biden has more what we call super voters now, people that vote in every election. Trump does really well with voters who are not always interested in every election. And he needs a higher turnout. These high turnouts have actually been very beneficial to him and House Republicans. So if you suddenly have a dip in turnout, I think it makes all the battleground states, the variance of who carries what state, it's just wider, and it just increases the range of outcomes.
So what do you think would change voters' mindset about the election at this point? What would it take to get them more engaged?
Another candidate. I mean, I mean, you're
something that's actually going to happen.
You know, no, I think, look, the debates could be a moment where, look, there's 2 theories of the case of this disinterest. People have perfect information and they're tuning out until the last minute and they'll tune in, or they've tuned out and they're not going to vote. And that's, ultimately, we don't know the answer to that until election.
And, you know, when it comes to, I want to get your comments on what's unfolding in New York right now with the Trump trial. What do you think, you know, all the coverage right now, he's sucking up the oxygen yet again.
Right.
What do you think how this plays out, if, you know, whether he's acquitted or, you know?
Look, I think anything other than a conviction is a win for him, meaning hung jury, sort of delay, sort of this, you know, anything that isn't a decisive verdict of guilty, I think ends up weirdly helping him one way or the other, but only a little. This trial, I think his behavior during the trial could end up having more impact on his standing than the result of the trial. I do think his just uneven behavior here and his unpredictable behavior, that's when he gets into trouble.
Yeah, and we'll be awaiting the ruling on the gag order in short order.
Yes.
Chuck Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, brother.
And those college protests we've been talking about are also drawing rebuke in Israel, where Prime Minister Netanyahu described the pro-Palestinian encampments as, quote, anti-Semitic mobs taking over leading universities. His criticism comes as Israel once again reaffirmed today that the IDF is moving ahead with its operations in Rafah. Joining me now is NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv. And Raf, for weeks, Israel has insisted they'll move ahead with their operations in Rafah. So what are we hearing today that's different? Are we seeing any significant movement, actual movement by the IDF in southern Gaza?
So, Gabe, for a couple of weeks now, we have seen pretty intensive Israeli bombing in Rafah. Israel says that it is targeting Hamas forces embedded in the city, but we are also seeing a lot of civilian casualties in that very densely populated southern city. But in terms of the ground offensive, we are not yet seeing what we expect to be the telltale signs. So a couple of things. Israel has committed to the United States, which is very opposed to this operation, that it would evacuate civilians from Rafah before it moves in on the ground. So we would expect to see the Israelis building up some kind of humanitarian zone for those million or so civilians to go. We would expect to see the IDF ordering civilians to leave Rafah. That could happen in the form of leaflets dropped from the sky, messages on social media, text messages, calls to local officials. And then finally, Gabe, we would expect to see Israeli forces massing around Rafah. And while Israel has called up more reserves in the last couple of days, we are not yet seeing large formations of Israeli ground troops.
And Raf, I want to turn now to the hostages. Within the last hour or so, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that President Biden had just met at the White House with one of the young hostages that was released last year. And Hamas today also released another hostage video. We're choosing not to show it, of course, but what do we know about the individual in that video, and what's the latest on talks to secure the release of those hostages?
So this video shows 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg Poland. He is an American-Israeli dual citizen. He is a hostage in Gaza. And Gabe, this is the first glimpse his family has had of him in the 201 days since October 7th. And in some ways, it is borderline miraculous that he survived that day, because the last video we have of him, he's being kidnapped from the Supernova Music Festival, and the majority of his left arm has been blown off by a Hamas grenade. So his parents have not known whether he was alive or dead. You can see in today's video that his left hand is gone, but he does seem to be, aside from that very serious injury, he seems generally to be in good health. We heard from his parents tonight. They are urging Israel and Hamas to go back to the negotiating table, to make a deal, to free the hostages, to get a ceasefire into place. I can tell you, Gabe, hearing from Israeli and Arab officials, those talks are in a very bad place. They have been for a long time. They seem very gridlocked. Gabe.
Yeah, Raf, and it's still unclear when exactly that video was shot. I know the U.S. is still waiting on that assessment. But Raf Sanchez, thank you so much, live in Israel for us. Raf, thank you. And coming up, clashing in the courts. The Biden administration takes on Idaho's near-total abortion ban in a key Supreme Court case today that could impact emergency care for pregnant women in Idaho and beyond. What the justices said during today's hearing. Next. Plus, breaking news out of Arizona, where House lawmakers just took a major first step towards repealing the state's Civil War-era near-total ban on abortions. We're live outside the Statehouse. Next, you're watching Meet the Press Now. Turning now to some breaking news out of Arizona, where on their third attempt, Arizona State House lawmakers passed a bill that would repeal the 1864 near-total ban on abortion upheld by the state Supreme Court earlier this month. 3 Republicans joined Democrats to pass the repeal of the Civil War-era law, and the bill must still go through the state Senate. The 1864 law is currently set to take effect June 8th. And joining me now from Arizona is NBC campaign embed Alex Tabbitt. And Alex, thank you for being there. It appears third time's the charm, right? So what is this bill's chances in the state Senate? And how might this affect the groups that are organizing a proposed constitutional amendment?
Well, Gabe, I think it's important to reiterate just how far this abortion ban is from actually being repealed. Just because it passed the state house today doesn't necessarily mean it will pass in the state Senate, which is expected to vote on the same bill a week from today. The state Senate controlled by Republicans, but I have been talking to operatives and political insiders in the Arizona State Senate who expect that at least two Republicans will join the Democrats in the repeal of this bill. Now, as you said, this 1864 ban is expected to start being enforced as early as June 8th here in Arizona. But there is a rule here in Arizona that a bill cannot be signed into law at least until 90 days after the end of the legislative session. What does that mean? That means that if the state Senate does repeal this ban next Wednesday, there could be a period of time in between when it starts actually being enforced here in Arizona and once it's actually repealed later in the summer, maybe even in the early fall. Gabe?
A lot to watch for. Alex Tabbitt with the breaking news in Arizona. Alex, thank you. And back here in Washington, the Supreme Court is weighing another abortion case, highlighting tensions between the Biden administration and states over post-Roe access to the procedure. Justices are grappling with whether Idaho's near-total ban conflicts with a federal law on emergency medical care. The law requires hospitals receiving Medicare and Medicaid funding to provide, quote, stabilizing care for patients whose life or health is in jeopardy. The Biden administration argues that stabilizing care should include abortions in certain situations and says the Idaho law is too narrow.
Do you dispute that there's a medical standard of care that when a woman is about to lose her reproductive organs unless she has an abortion, that doctors would not say that an abortion is the appropriate standard of care in that situation?
Your Honor, what I dispute is that there is a national uniform standard of care that requires a top-down approach in all states. Idaho has set its own standard of care, and it has drawn the line on a difficult question.
Idaho's law only allows termination if it's necessary to prevent death. In Idaho, doctors have to shut their eyes to everything except death, whereas under EMTALA, you're supposed to be thinking about things like, is she about to lose her fertility? Is her uterus going to become incredibly scarred because of the bleeding? Is she about to undergo the possibility of kidney failure?
And it comes as the Associated Press reports that federal documents show a spike in complaints of pregnant women turned away from U.S. emergency rooms after the High Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And joining me now from outside the Supreme Court is NBC Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, the Biden administration is arguing abortion may be appropriate medical treatment under this federal law. The Idaho law has a life of the mother exception. So why does the government say that's not enough?
Well, it's a key question, Gabe, and really the government is saying it's not good enough because there are a number of cases where a woman's life might not be at risk, but that her health might be at risk. And the sound you played really gets to it. And this was really a big part of the oral arguments we heard today. The government was essentially saying there are a number of cases where women could come in and have all sorts of other complications, like she could be developing an infection, or her fallopian tubes could be in jeopardy of being shut off, or she could even lose an organ, another sort of organ that would hurt her future fertility. So there were a lot of these conversations going on today in the oral arguments, and they're basically saying doctors should not wait until a woman's on death's door to treat her, because there are a lot of risks associated with that, Gabe.
And Yamiche, reading the tea leaves here, sometimes we get to at least see how the case could potentially go based on the justices' questions. So how were the arguments received by the justices today?
It's very hard to predict how a 6-3 majority Supreme Court is going to rule in any case. That being said, there were a number of cases where liberal and conservative justices were both honing in on the same things and asking really pointed questions of the lawyer for Idaho. I'll take, for example, Amy Coney Barrett. She really dug in and at one point said she was stunned at the idea that the lawyer was not saying that in cases where a woman might lose her reproductive organs, that doctors might not step in and also be backed by Idaho law. She was saying at one point that could prosecutors come in and say, well, I disagree with the decision that this doctor made, so in that case, I'm going to press charges and possibly throw you in jail. The lawyer for Idaho was essentially saying, well, that's prosecutorial discretion. That's how the laws are written. So the tea leaves here make it seem as though while the Supreme Court might be a little divided, they seem to be leaning toward siding with the Biden administration. Though Samuel Alito, who wrote the decision overturning Roe v. Wade, he was one of the few justices that was very clear in siding with Idaho in this situation, Gabe.
Still, Yamiche, a lot of hypotheticals to consider. Now, the MIFA Christone case the court heard earlier this year has questions of standing that could allow justices to rule on it without really grappling with the issue of abortion itself. Do they have the same kind of legal leeway here?
It doesn't look like it, because here the issue really is about abortion, and it's about specifically when can a woman possibly get an abortion if there's an emergency situation. When you listen to the Idaho lawyer, he was talking specifically about whether or not the doctors could be focused specifically only on the woman, or in his case, he said there really should be two patients to be thinking about, the unborn child as well as the woman, when it comes to issuing and giving stabilizing care, which is the federal law that the Biden administration is focusing on here. So it doesn't look like this court could really deal with this issue without also delving right back into abortion policy in this country. Gabe.
Yamiche Alcindor outside the Supreme Court. Yamiche, thank you. And joining me now for more is Sarah Rosenbaum, Professor Emerita of Health, Law, and Policy at George Washington University. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. For you, what were the biggest takeaways from today's oral arguments?
I think the biggest takeaways were the extraordinary admission on the part of the state of Idaho that it was possible for prosecutors to swoop in and pursue women, pursue their physicians for essentially a violation of state law simply for intervening at the point at which they felt that the health of the woman was at risk. The prosecutors, according to the state, reserve prosecutorial discretion, as Yamiche Alcindor said, to go after anybody and second-guess doctors. So that was number one. Number two, I think this was a case where the facts of the case, the sheer facts of what we're talking about, essentially overcome the kinds of crabbed legal arguments that you heard from Justice Alito and Justice Gorsuch, who were essentially trying to argue federal overreach, that this was nothing more than an abortion statute, cloaked in vastly overblown federal law, and those positions lack merit. But beyond that, it was an overwhelming display of why it is that medical care is best left to doctors, not prosecutors.
And Professor, as we mentioned earlier, the AP reports there was an uptick in pregnant women turned away from emergency rooms post-Dobbs. What about these state laws create such a chilling effect?
There are a couple of things. One is, of course, there are states like Idaho, there are about 6 or 7 of these states that literally exclude all permissible abortions in emergency situations but death endangering abortions. So the standard has a chilling effect. But the more serious issue, speaking from a legal perspective, is the notion that you are never safe as the doctor, that at any moment a prosecutor can decide to seize the case, demand that you come in for questioning, bring in other medical opinions that may be contrary to yours. Emergency physicians make these decisions in the heat of the moment. They must be given latitude. And so it is the state's overreach into medical care itself and crucial decisions about health endangering situations, as well as a standard that on its face is utterly inconsistent with EMTALA.
And Professor, speaking of latitude, the lawsuit from the administration comes as it really tries to find a way to address abortion access in the wake of the Dobbs decision. So what kind of latitude does the executive branch have to act alone on abortion in the wake of Roe?
Well, and this is a situation in the case of the emergency care statute where the administration is acting well within the confines of federal law. That their position on this matter, first of all, is consistent with the position that Republican and Democratic administrations have taken over decades now, that there are terrible situations in which an abortion may be the proper stabilizing care. And their position is no different from that of past administrations. And second of all, there's nothing about their position that is essentially coloring outside the lines of the law under which they are acting. This is settled emergency care law. It has been the law for 40 years. And it is only because of Dobbs that now something as fundamental to Americans as emergency care rights has been thrown into complete chaos.
Professor Sarah Rosenbaum, we appreciate your expertise. Thank you. And up next, the long slog that finally got Ukraine aid to Joe Biden's desk as the president signs a key foreign aid bill into law just hours ago. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. And welcome back. After months of debate, negotiations on Capitol Hill, and a primetime Oval Office address, threats against the speaker's job as well, and an intense in-person lobbying campaign by President Zelensky, and setbacks on the battlefield, billions of dollars in aid is finally heading to Ukraine. President Biden signed a $95 billion package today that includes roughly $60 billion in aid for the war-torn country. And this all comes a day after the Senate passed the measure in overwhelming fashion, 79-18. The president said the first shipment of military assistance would be arriving within hours of him signing the legislation, while touting the deal as a major victory for U.S. security, despite the 6-month delay.
I just signed into law. It's going to make America safer, it's going to make the world safer, and it continues America's leadership in the world, and everyone knows it. It gives vital support to America's partners, and so they can defend themselves against threats to their sovereignty and to the lives and freedom of their citizens. And it's an investment in our own security, because when our allies are stronger, and I want to make this point again and again, when our allies are stronger, we are stronger.
The package also includes aid to Israel, humanitarian relief in Gaza, aid for Taiwan, and a potential ban on TikTok. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now. And Monica, the White House confirmed today that the U.S. had already given Ukraine long-range ballistic missiles known as ATACMS earlier, but only after news organizations, including NBC News, broke the story. So what more can you tell us about that?
Well, we now know, Gabe, that the president had secretly told his national security team to make sure that Ukraine could get these ATACMS, and that this was purposefully done quietly and on the lowdown for operational security reasons, which is, of course, they didn't want Russia or the world to know that Ukraine was going to be able to use these to try to, of course, make some advances in territory that they have lost throughout this war. But we do know also that the White House has previously provided Ukraine with medium-range ballistic missiles. That's something that happened last year, but at the time, the White House, again, didn't confirm it immediately. They only talked about it later on, citing those same security reasons and not wanting to telegraph or preview what the U.S. was going to be able to provide Ukraine. So these are critical issues that really we have just seen them even be used in the last week or so. We know they've been used at least twice in terms of these long-range ballistic missiles, and the Ukrainian military does believe that they're very helpful in what they are trying to do here with some of this territory, but they're also desperate for more ammunition, for armored vehicles, for their air defense systems, and that's what this $60 billion is hopefully going to be able to do for them, they said today, cheering the fact that this was now going to become a reality, Gabe.
And Monica, a short time ago, the National Security Advisor said that he thinks that that money will be able to get Ukraine at least through the end of the year, through 2024. So does the U.S. believe that this $60 billion in aid will help Ukraine defeat Russia, actually defeat Russia, or just prolong the war?
And that is what the National Security Advisor said today. He believes that this will give them the ability to have a better position where they could win the war. And that is, of course, the U.S. position for so long, for months, has been if they have the U.S. support, they will be able to continue to make these kinds of advances. And without it, they really did risk losing the war. So they're now saying by giving them all of this military assistance, they will likely be able to do that. But it was notable, I thought, Gabe, that the National Security Advisor said that, because we all know that another battle like this in Congress would be so difficult to get across the finish line. So in many ways, they're saying that because this was really their last best chance to do it.
And Monica, I want to turn now to another subject. As we mentioned, the president also signed legislation that could pave the way for TikTok to be banned due to national security concerns. I know the White House isn't using that word banned, but the Biden campaign continues to use the platform. So how do they explain that disconnect?
And they knew this was the likely outcome even months ago when they first debuted their campaign account. And really, they don't care that much because they say we need to meet young voters where they are, and that's online. And they know that millions of Americans are on TikTok, and that's just one of the tools that they're going to be using to try to reach that key demographic. And they're saying that because it's going to be months before potentially, of course, this company, ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, has to make this decision about selling, though they say they won't. And then even then, the president could extend that by another 90 days. So likely it could be a year before that would even happen. So they know and they're committed to using this throughout the election at least. Gabe.
Do as I say, not as I do. Monica Alba outside the White House. Monica, thank you. And after the break, 1 in 4. That's how many voters say there's a chance they'll change their minds come November, according to our new NBC News poll. We'll dig into the latest numbers and why they matter for 2024. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Hundreds of millions of dollars are set to be spent by presidential campaigns over the next few months, all over about 1 in 4 voters. According to new numbers from our NBC poll, 26% of voters tell us they are open to changing their mind between now and November, compared to 66% who say they've made their mind up. 81% of Biden supporters tell us they've made up their mind, as well as a similar number of Trump supporters. The most persuadable voters appear to be the ones backing independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr., with just over 60% saying their mind is made up. And joining me now on set is Akayla Gardner, White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, former Alabama Democratic Senator Doug Jones, and former Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. Thank you all so much for joining me here on the panel. And Akayla, I want to go back to that number we were talking about. 26% in our NBC News poll say that they still may change their minds. Given that these candidates are so well known, does that number surprise you?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty striking number, especially because both Biden and Trump have tried to make this election very much a binary choice. But this shows, at least for a certain or sizable segment of voters, that is simply not the case. And this also echoes a poll that Bloomberg has out today with the Morning Consult, which shows that voters are really in flux, especially in swing states. Biden had this huge bump after the State of the Union. That has really retracted now, and that's probably attributed to the economy. We saw this inflation print earlier this month that shows the outlook for inflation is really not what Biden would like it to be going forward.
Nice plug for the Bloomberg poll. So does this show how unpopular these candidates are?
I mean, it's something I hear from voters all the time. Even if they know that they're going to vote for Biden or Trump, they're just in the situation where they're very disgruntled. This is a rematch of 2020. They're also frustrated by both of these candidates' age. They just simply cannot believe we're in this place once again after 4 years.
And Charlie, I want to turn to you. I also want to put up some of what our friend Chuck Todd wrote today. He's out with a new column, and he says that this will be a late deciding electorate. Thanks to voters who have decided to tune out an election they believe they already understand without needing any new information. We know what 90% of the electorate is going to do. It's the last 10% of swing voters who either swing between the two parties or swing between voting and not voting who will decide this election. Do you agree?
I do agree, and I'd also say, too, the level of dissatisfaction with the two major candidates is high. Nearly 2/3 of voters think one candidate is too old, Joe Biden, the other, Donald Trump, too crazy. And they're looking for something else. And many of them are going to throw their votes to RFK Jr., or Cornel West, or Jill Stein. So, yes, I think people are going to be late deciding. They are tuning out, and they'll probably refocus again later on. And so the question for many of them is, do I write in somebody? Or do I throw my vote away in a write-in or for one of these small party candidates? So I think it's a real problem.
And Doug, how much does President Biden's organizational advantage, his cash advantage, how much does that help him get these gettable voters?
Well, I think it's a huge advantage right now because what you've seen the Biden folks do is stay the course. They've got a process. People have disagreed with it. A lot of Democrats have had a lot of angst about the way they were doing things, but they're trending in the right direction. And I think that at the end of the day, they're gonna peak at the right time. They want to make sure that they're getting to all of their voters. They're doing everything that they can. And I disagree with Charlie a little bit on this. I don't think that there's going to be that many. Remember, in 1992, we were talking about this before we went on. In 1992, Ross Perot was actually leading in the polls over George H.W. Bush, an incumbent president, and a challenger from Arkansas, Bill Clinton. At the end of the day, people move back, and I think that that's going to happen.
Then he got out, got back in.
But still, they moved out. He was leading, though.
Speaking of people who got out of this campaign already, I want to put up some of the results from yesterday's Pennsylvania primary. Nikki Haley got more than 16% of the vote. That's more than 150,000 ballots cast for a candidate not running. She hasn't been running for a while. Is that number notable to you?
Yeah, it's especially notable because Pennsylvania is a closed primary state, so these were only Republicans voting. I'm one of those Republicans who happened to vote for Nikki Haley yesterday, and not only was it a 17% average statewide, but in the collar counties of Philadelphia, Montgomery County, third largest county in the state, 25% voted for Nikki Haley. Bucks and Chester counties outside 20%. So it is significant, and I think this is Trump's big problem, that he has real base erosion. I'm not convinced all these voters are coming back to him, and he's going to need in excess of 90% of the Republican vote to win. This is a big problem.
And, Akayla, I want to turn now to the Democratic side in Pennsylvania. Congresswoman Democrat Summer Lee, she faced a primary challenge, but she won by 20 points, even though, her stance on the Israel-Hamas war. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think progressives have really tried to walk a fine line when it comes to Gaza, but I think young voters have really played a huge issue on this particularly, and that's what we're seeing right now with these protests continue. And it's resonated with that segment particularly, but also with people of color. And I think that's something that the Biden campaign has really walked a fine line on themselves, is not isolating those voters who they really need to win in November.
Now, the Biden campaign will come back and say, look, that isn't going to translate nationally, that these progressives, that they're not going to vote on this issue. Do the results last night in Pennsylvania seem to suggest otherwise?
I think here what really Biden is doing is he cannot take the opposite stance, because he risks isolating an even bigger segment if he were to turn against Israel here. And that's why he's touting really this bill that passed in the Senate right now, which is giving them obviously millions of dollars in aid. Ukraine obviously get the bigger portion of that aid there, but he has really had to walk this fine line here, particularly because of young voters and people of color.
And I want to go back to Doug. Doug, Biden's staffer gave a quote to Politico. I want to read it here. The Biden staffer said that what is happening in Gaza is not the top issue for young voters. It's not going to be for the vast majority of young voters, the thing that's going to determine whether they vote or how they vote. That's what we were just discussing. But if the Biden campaign isn't sweating these protests, is that a mistake?
No, it's not that they're not sweating. Look, Joe Biden is a man of people. He is humble. He's got a humility. He has got compassion. It is. I've known this guy for 40+ years, and I can tell you what he sees happening in Gaza right now is tearing him up. But he's also got to be the president of the United States. He's got to look at protecting democracy. And Israel is a strategic partner. I think what you've seen in the last few months is that, in weeks especially, is more and more pressure being put on the Netanyahu government to get more aid out there, to be more strategic in what they're doing in Gaza, and take into account the humanitarian toll. So it's not that they're ignoring this. They are certainly not ignoring it, and I guarantee you Joe Biden is not ignoring it.
And Charlie, I want to turn now to the foreign aid bill that this Congress passed yesterday. I want to put up a quote now from Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. And here's the quote. It said, what Donald Trump did was he stayed out of it. I think it was smart politically because he's not president of the United States. What's smart for him is to maintain flexibility. Donald Trump has got involved a lot of times. What type of euphemism is maintain flexibility?
Well, it's kind of like on abortion. You know, he's gone all over the place on that now.
Right. Well, can I just say, like, I don't want to make my deadline. I want to maintain flexibility and get out of it. Like, what? Well,
look, the Republican Party. I'm really pleased that the Republican Party's, I'll say, serious adults, took charge over the weekend and said, we have to protect our interests and our allies' interests, and that's why they had to do what they did to support Ukraine. And they marginalized the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, who actually offered an amendment to strip all the Ukraine funding. I think she got 20-some votes. And I think what they did is they pushed back on this radical extreme wing, and they said, you know what, over 300 of us wanted this done. Just do it, and they did it.
Akayla, really quickly, because we're running out of time. Do you think if Donald Trump was in the Oval Office, would that foreign bill have passed?
It's hard to say. Donald Trump flip-flops on nearly everything, including TikTok, which was also part of this bill. He once supported a ban, and now he's saying that he's against it. So
Thank you, Akayla, Doug, and Charlie. Thank you all for joining us here on the panel. And after the break, tomorrow is set to be a major day in court for the former president, with Donald Trump's historic New York criminal trial set to collide with a hearing at the Supreme Court on his claims of sweeping presidential immunity. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Donald Trump's legal issues will be front and center here in Washington tomorrow, when the Supreme Court hears arguments over his sweeping claims of presidential immunity tied to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The court agreed to hear those arguments back in February, and it's not clear when it will issue a ruling. Trump's federal election interference case has been on hold pending the court's decision. As for Trump himself, the former president and presumptive Republican nominee will be back in a Manhattan courtroom tomorrow for the resumption of his hush money trial. There are no proceedings in that case today. Trump's longtime friend and former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker will be on the stand tomorrow for a third day. And we're also still awaiting a decision from the judge presiding over that case on whether the former president will face any penalties for publicly attacking witnesses and criticizing the jury pool. And joining me now is Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and now an NBC News legal analyst. Joyce, it is so good to have you here in person. We were just talking. I don't think we've met in person. It's really good to have you.
It's nice to be with you.
And why don't you walk us through tomorrow? I know there's a lot going on
Right.
as we laid out, but in the Supreme Court, what do you expect to go down tomorrow?
So tomorrow, this is the moment we've been waiting for, because the motion that the former president filed in this case is a motion that, if he succeeds with it on this appeal, would end the prosecution. He's argued that he's immune as a former president. So tomorrow we'll hear, obviously, the arguments from both sides, and what we'll be looking for are the questions of the justices, because there are, I think, at least three paths here. One would be to agree with the former president that there is presidential immunity. That's very unlikely. The consequences would be extreme. It would mean, for instance, that Joe Biden could steal this election.
Which justices do you think might give us the best insight as to how the court might rule?
So I think that the question here is, will this be unanimous, right? Or, as you were pointing out, will there be some justices in the middle? So we'll look certainly to the Chief Justice. This case will be important to him. It's a legacy case. And I think he, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett will form that center branch of the court if this is not going to be an 8-1 or 9-0 opinion.
So based on the current calendar, do you think Donald Trump's election interference case is going to happen before the election?
It depends on what the Supreme Court does. It's up to them how quickly they want to move.
But even if, I was hearing one analyst say, even if Donald Trump loses this immunity argument, if it takes long enough and it puts the Jack Smith case on hold, isn't that really a win for Donald Trump?
It really is. If the court holds this opinion until the end of their term, if this is a late June or an early July case, or if the ruling requires it to go back down to Judge Chutkan for further proceedings on the scope of immunity, then this case will de facto be over.
Going back to the other case, and actually the gag order in the other case, it's hard to keep track of these. Judge Merchan, we're waiting for that ruling on the gag order, whether the former president violated that gag order. When do you think that might come down?
I think we'll see it come any day now, maybe any minute now. Look, the judge needs to decide this and to tell Donald Trump what the consequences of future violations are.
And looking ahead till tomorrow in the actual case, David Pecker is set to be back on the stand. So far, what type of witness do you think he has been?
He's been a good witness. He's set the stage. He's told the jury that the scheme here was essentially catch and kill to elect Trump, right? This was about electing Donald Trump in 2016. But I would caution people not to get too enthusiastic about the testimony before the cross-examination. Right. That's when you find out what a witness is made of.
And that was what I was going to ask you next. The cross-examination, what do you think is going to happen there?
So there are a couple of different strategies, but what we'll see for certain will be an effort to show the limits of Pecker's testimony, to show, for instance, that he wasn't in the room with Trump, didn't talk to Trump, and the prosecution will stress the points where he was.
So I was down in Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago, and I asked the former president whether he planned to testify. He said that he would. I know we should take that with a grain of salt. But at this point, do you think he has anything really to gain from testifying in this case?
I think his lawyers will try to keep him off the stand. There was a Sandoval hearing to determine which of his former bad acts and crimes prosecutors could cross-examine him about. That list includes things like the defamation judgment E. Jean Carroll obtained against him. It would be, I think, very unlikely for lawyers to be willing to see their clients subject themselves to that kind of cross-examination.
And really quickly, what witness are you most looking forward to after Pecker?
You know, it's a hard call, but I think that Hope Hicks will be very interesting. She was close to Trump. She'll confirm some of the details.
And she doesn't usually speak publicly, so
No,
it'll be
she
very
doesn't.
interesting to hear what she has to say. Joyce Vance, thanks again so much for joining us here in studio. And thank you for watching. Kristen's back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.